Ar is stáit Camerá gfuil fi rafael orm nach bhfuil an tear a hain is seo nocht. Tags sin ar láthir ó ráige chéile, bhín coppla focail a ráige, léigeann sé ar hain gur slí é, nó fáil go haise cint, ach ní bhín éon gníomhhaid a chorbe. I have to say, Minister of State, that I'm very disappointed that the Minister doesn't think it's an important enough issue to even turn up for the spokesperson of the spokesperson of our party and the sponsoring deputy for a very important proposed piece of legislation. And this is a properly prepared, comprehensive piece of legislation. And I think we need to look at what's happening. Variable rate mortgages are being kept at an artificially high rate. In fact, if it was any other consumer product, we'd have the Consumer Affairs Agency in saying there's a cartel operating. All you have to do is look at the rates and see that KBC 4.3%, Ulster Bank 4.3%, Permanent TSB 4.3%, ICS at 4.35%, Bank of Ireland at 4.5%, Danske Bank at 4.95%, and the outlier here is AIB at 3.9%. And what are they doing? Because they lost money, because they couldn't run their affairs efficiently, because they gave out too many tracker mortgages, they're penalising the most vulnerable borrowers of long-term finance in the state, the person who borrowed at a variable rate during the boom time. And what are the government doing about it? Well, it reminds me of the summer of 2012, when the Minister and the Taoiseach went over to Brussels and they got a seismic shift that amounted to a puff of smoke in relation to the bailing out of the banks. And the same thing happened in this case, and everything was meant to happen by the 1st of July. The 1st of July came, and effectively nothing had happened of any consequence. And in the meantime, the banks are taking houses off people who are paying the full interest and a certain amount of the capital. If you don't know that that's happening, you're obviously not listening to your constituents. If you know it's happening, you know that if the interest rates were at the rate they should be at, these people will be able to pay the full amount of their mortgages. And what makes the thing more puzzling still, what I find very, very strange is what's happening, for example, with the Bank of Ireland. But the Bank of Ireland will give you a fixed rate for 2 years cheaper than a variable rate, even though we know that the price of money on the wholesale markets will probably never be cheaper. Now, can you explain that to me, Minister? Why are they giving a 2-year fixed rate cheaper than the variable rate? Now, I could understand that being so if rates were at a historic high. But when they're at a historic low, wouldn't you think it would be cheaper for the bank to borrow short-term funds at the moment, or even long-term funds, but be able to get them at the moment cheaper than they're likely to be able to get them in the future? So the question has to be, what are the banks at? But of course the banks are trying to make money for themselves and for their shareholders. And that's what they're at. Now, there's a principle of regulation right across the board which goes into the heart of consumer legislation and competition law, and that is where there is a small number of private monopolies, you do not allow them to create an effective cartel. And in fact, it's interesting enough that if you read your Constitution and the social guidelines at the back of the Constitution, you would see that there is provision constitutionally that you have an obligation to deal with this issue. And this bill is a way of dealing with the issue. This bill is a way of actually ensuring that the banks act in a fair and proper manner and stop robbing the poor people who happen to be in the unfortunate situation that they made the wrong choice, not knowing what the future is going to hold in terms of interest rates, when they took out the variable rate rather than taking out a tracker mortgage when they got their mortgages. And I would hope that over the next 2 days that the Minister would actually listen to the proposal by Deputy McGrath. A very thoughtful person, a very considered person who has put a lot of work into looking at these issues and studying all the implications, who has come up with a very, very rational proposal which basically says if they're overcharging, abusing the monopoly situation or the cartel situation of a small number of customers, if they're abusing their situation, that it is a difficult thing to swap one mortgage for another because there are all sorts of legal issues of swapping the security and so on, and you know all the hassle that that would cause an ordinary citizen and the cost and fees from the legal people, particularly these days. So swapping mortgages is not like buying a new coat. It's quite complicated if you want to change the lender on your mortgage. You know that in that situation, it is incumbent on the state to act as outlined in the Constitution to protect the interest of the citizen from exploitation. And the simple thing to do would be, when we come to tomorrow night, for the government to say, yes, you have come forward, Deputy McGrath, with a good way of dealing with this issue. It is a reasonable proposition. It is one we need to protect our citizens, and we're going to support what you have done. And I believe that if you don't do this, it is a clear sign to mortgage holders, and particularly to distressed borrowers, that this government does not care. There is more interest in the corporate interest than it has in the interest of the citizen. And I think you will make, as a government, a clear choice tomorrow. And I will look forward with hope that you will make the right decision, that you'll do the big thing and say, yes, we accept that Fianna Fáil have been making a valid point and that we need to actually act and do something about it now, rather than wringing our hands of it and literally doing nothing.